All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I am Abir Shinawi.
And I am Doug Handy, and welcome to Real Talk, our space.
Right. Today's
We're
episode.
back.
Yes, we are. Wow, it's already been a week.
A week
A week
already.
goes by fast.
Yep.
It does. So today we are kicking off our series for July, which we called America the Beautiful, Ode to Immigration and Immigrants. And today is our first episode with some very amazing, distinguished guests, which we'll talk about in a second. But, this idea came about because I am a child of immigrants. As you can see in the banner in Arabic, ahlan wa sahlan is what you always greet your guests when you see them, which is welcome, be comfortable. Arabs are known for their hospitality. But I'm also dedicating this to an amazing woman
Who would that
who
be?
I wonder,
Hmm.
So in Arabic, we would call her, which if you know much about Palestinians, there's like falah, and then there's the Madani, and we're the falah, which are basically the farmers. And she's our yumma. We call her yumma. Mama Tamam. We called her the Donna, boss lady. I'm 45 and I'm still afraid of her, all of that. So this entire series this month is dedicated to my mom because I always wonder what it's like to just leave your family and then uproot and start. She was young. She was like 19 when she got married, raised 6 kids, of course, with my father and all, but her generation, they did a lot of the work, they did a lot of the stuff, but just thinking of acclimating to everything, they didn't have the technology that they do today. And I remember her telling me stories of how she would write letters to her mom and send them with whoever is going back to the mother country, or she would record cassette tapes. And my kids don't even know what cassette tapes are, but record those. And it would take about a month for her mother to get it. And my mom has been through a lot ever since she's been to this country. But I dedicate this entire series because she considers herself an American. She loves being in this country. But she's also very proudly Palestinian. As you can see, it's a very traditional, what we call a thobe, dress that we wear for special functions.
That's
but,
beautiful.
thank you. And she just takes pride in who she has developed and what she has become. And like we said in the lyrics, there ain't no woman alive that can take my mama's place. Absolutely. Tupac. So I'm dedicating this entire month to all the mothers and parents out there who did come and start a new life in this country, because it is not easy. It is totally not easy with the language and everything that you're going to do. So our America the Beautiful is being kicked off today.
That's right. And we did, if we have any of our we have guests in the studio, of course, and we have our guests who check, who are with us from week to week. If you're an immigrant, if you're a child of an immigrant, we want you to shout out yourself, right? And and hit the live comments and put something in there. Let us know that you're with us this evening, right? So we're about to get into our distinguished in studio guest. And before we get into that, though, I guess just briefly, I guess as a Black man born in America, I have a question, a rhetorical question for now, and that's: were enslaved Africans immigrants to the United States? So, according to HUD Secretary Ben Carson, they were. They were. So, and
what
I think
historical basis is he basing that on?
We call that an ahistorical basis. In other words,
okay, got it.
Right. Lacking all historical basis.
Got it.
And there's a quote, but we won't. I don't know. The quote's good. Can I?
Yes.
So he said in 2017, and it goes with the theme of this month. That's what America is about: a land of dreams and opportunities. He then added, there were other immigrants who came here on the bottom of slave ships, worked even longer, even harder for less. But they too had a dream that one day their sons, daughters, grandsons, granddaughters, great-grandsons, great-granddaughters might pursue prosperity and happiness in this land. And that is from the Dr. Ben Carson. So, with no further delay, just let that marinate.
We are going to let that marinate, and our comments are ready, fire and hype. But we're going to get to those in a second. Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Not.
So you all are here. Welcome.
So we have V, who we had last week. Welcome back, sister. Absolutely not.
Right. And look at my man, Brent. Brenda's always first at the gate. You always know when Brenda's on the set because he wastes no time.
Nope.
So Brenda's not agreeing with the HUD secretary.
Nope.
So,
I love V's. He's delusional. Okay, that's where we're going to leave it.
We will leave it and move on to some guests who I think aren't, or they're nowhere near as delusional. Right. They've got their history correct and they're doing some great things.
Yep.
So we have Adam Strom, founder of Reimagining Migration, and Sarah Saeed, Director of Language and Equity at the Elgin Math and Science Academy. Very happy to have our guest with us here this evening. Welcome, welcome.
Hi. Hello, welcome everybody. Or as we say in Arabic, ahlan wa sahlan.
Shukran.
Afwan. All right, so let's get started. Could you two introduce yourselves just a little bit about who you are, what you do?
Ms. Saeed, you need to go first.
Okay, so Adam and I know each other pretty well, by the way, for those of you who are out there. My name's Sarah Saeed, and I am currently the Director of Language and Equity Programs at the Elgin Math and Science Academy in Elgin, Illinois. And pretty much we are what you would call a one-school charter that is also what you would call an EL education school, which EL stands for expeditionary learning. So in our program, we offer a very SEL infused and hands-on experience in schooling for all children. And language learners are typically very important in our environment because they are an asset to the environment. And we have a very asset-based philosophy at our school. So, I mean, a little bit about me. I've served as a director of language programs. I've served as a middle school dean in Chicago, and I've also served as a teacher of multilingual learners as well.
Can you talk to our audience, for those who aren't educators, what SEL means?
Social emotional learning. So we provide an environment and a community of mindfulness and character education, as well as a STEM infused school that also has, I would say, a very social justice mindset as well.
Don't you love how like Sarah pulls out all like the educational acronyms, SEL and STEM?
I always forget. I'm in my world. I always forget.
I got to get my bingo card over here, Sarah.
STEM is
science, technology, engineering, and math, and also actually it's STEAM now because you got to have the A too for art.
Oh, that's all your area, Doug.
Yes. We got to. You might have to come back and do another episode.
Yeah, sounds good. Mr. Strom.
So I'm Adam Strom, and I'm the director of Reimagining Migration. And I get to work with like amazing people, including Sarah, but also the co-founders of the organization. I joke that I get to be like the white guy talking about this stuff. Everybody else in the organization is actually an immigrant, and I'm not, but that's okay. So what Reimagining Migration is founded to do is we really would like to think about how we can make schools and actually every learning environment a better place for immigrant origin students. And so some of that is about working to break down biases against immigrant kids, both in schools, but also out of school. And then think about what would happen if we actually understood migration, right? It is one of the most important civic issues of our time. So Doug, I can't help it. I got to speak back to Mr. Carson.
Please do.
So one of the things that happens, right, is that we build these mythologies about stories of migration without actually understanding the details, and the details matter. So it's a real. I know that we'll talk about this later, but why do people move? And it's so by classic definition, immigrants have a choice to move. Enslaved Africans had no choice, right? Absolutely no choice, and those differences matter. Now, there were pieces of the story that are similar. There's a story about life before migration. There's this journey. There's whatever those horrible transitions to an incredibly brutal racist society. But those particularities matter so much, and they're not the same. So my family were immigrants too, and their journey, as awful as it was and as difficult as it was not the same story. And it is and it is dangerous to make a suggestion that this is a similar story, because what you start to do is build false equivalencies.
So Adam, So we got it going already, right? We're what 9 minutes in. So Adam just broke it down. They're in the chat. Adam, they're right there with you. We got folks in the chat that were saying the same thing. I like Robin. She's reflecting and giving thoughts on it. Brendan speaking around the same lines you're speaking. I can't wait to hear more of that. Like when you tell us how, like what is a migration story? And like I said, mythologies is the key word, right? We call it real talk, not mythological talk. That's not what this is called. So we're excited to get into it.
Great, thanks.
So speaking on the lines of immigration, and I asked if you would share your story, Adam, because when we first met, I'm huge on last names. And I always ask, people origins of their last names. And I learned something fascinatingly new. Now, me being of Palestinian origin, I've known a lot about my Jewish cousins and counterparts, so forth and so on. But you gave me a little nugget that I thought would be awesome for you to share with the rest of the world. So what is it about last names and the Jewish people?
Yeah, sure. So Eastern European Jews didn't have last names, right? I was actually just checking the details. So in France, they tried to get East Jews to have last names in 1792 because up to that point, I would have been Adam. My father was Terry. I would have been Adam.
Terry.
Terry, right? But that's not how the French culture did it. And so as Napoleon marched further east, right, and caught up to where my family were. And we were fortunate, right, because we were absolutely second-class citizens. And by the time the French army got there, it was a good thing for my family. But we had to go take a last name. And so the family story is that we wanted like a fancy-sounding last name. They didn't have any money. They were these peasants, but they wanted a fancy-sounding last name. So they took the name Wasserstrom, which apparently they had to buy from somebody.
Oh.
And a German-sounding name was more expensive.
Wow. Okay.
But that's
at a premium.
Like
premium.
I don't know. I don't have a receipt. but we would have been Wasserstroms, and then they became Stroms in Chicago, right?
Okay.
And when they came across to the United States.
Okay. So you have Chicago roots.
Yeah, but the other story
Yes.
I'm the only one apparently with no Chicago connection.
We'll change that, Doug. We'll change it.
But the other interesting connection, as we start to think about connections to today, is one of the Wasserstroms that gets out of the country because they are smuggled. They're in a quarantine city, and they're smuggled out of town in a coffin, because that's the only way that they're going to get out to actually get on a boat to the United States.
Wow.
So I think about the treacherous journeys that people come. I think immigrant stories are superhero stories. They are. All right, I'll shut up.
Well, that leads us to the video. If you go to Adam's website, which I'll share later, and you go to who they are, there's a great video that he shares about reimagining migration, which we'll share right now. Wow. When I watch a video, that gave me chills, especially the 25% of children under 18 are immigrants. And it's interesting when I watched it and Madeleine Albright came up, but I can tell that story later, but I read a commencement speech and it was directed kind of towards Madeleine Albright. But I just thought it was funny because, as Doug said, there are no coincidences in life. So thank you for that video. That was great.
And just a detail, immigrant origins. So that means at least one of
immigrant origins. That's right. Yeah. Correct.
Okay. Okay. So we talked a little earlier about, who your students are and, multilingual learners, or what we call in our school district English learners. But talk to us about what led you to teach multilingual learners. Like what brought you to that work?
I mean, I fell into it, and, I went to college. I was pre-law because we all have to be pre-something, right? Javier's smirking at me. So I was pre-law because I had to be pre-something, But I was also an English major, and, I really didn't know what I was going to do. And somebody said, well, why don't you just teach? And I'm like, okay, but I'll also think about the law school thing too. And, I ended up student teaching in the Humboldt Park community, actually, which is a largely Latino community within the Chicagoland area. And I just fell in love with it. And so I ended up getting a position actually in a community near where I grew up. And I worked there for about 6 years as an ELL teacher. And the students came as an ELL high school teacher. And the students came from, majority of places, from Yemen, from Palestine, from Jordan. And also I had students from Latin America as well, and Poland and Lithuania. And, they all had stories, and some of them were stories of joy and some of them were not. And so, it was really that like ambassadorship I learned I had to play quickly, that, they really depend on the ELL teacher, especially if we speak the language. And, for the majority of students, actually a good 2/3 I did. And so I learned quickly that this was a calling. And so the law school, because I was even still thinking about that, the law school, I kind of just said, you know what, I'm not going, and pursued my master's actually in literacy, because I wanted to get better at my job, which, many of my students were coming from learning Arabic script to learning English script. And some of them had some English education in Jordan or in Palestine, but, they needed support. And so I really had to learn how to take high school students and teach them how to decode and teach them phonics, as well as get them through that high level social studies and that high level science. And some of them had gaps in their education because they were refugees and spent this many years in camp and that many years in camp. And so it wasn't an easy job, but it was a rewarding job. And I just kind of kept through the system. I took a couple of years to raise my kids, and then came back into teaching ELL. And because it is very, you're always working. You're always working. I use a system even where my parents can text me in a way. And sometimes I get messages at 8 or 9 o'clock at night for somebody that needs support or somebody needs help with simple things like filling out a school form. And it's at the time where they can message me, because they may be working from 5 in the morning to 5 in the evening in some cases, like we don't know. So that's kind of the role that I feel like we play, especially in virtual learning. I felt like, an instructional coach to the parent, as well as the teacher to the child, because the parent has to guide the child and has to support the child in the work we're giving them. So that's, and it's not an easy role, but it's a great role to be in. It's a fun role to be in. I would say I've been in this for 16 years. And students my first year teaching are probably, I would say, mid-30s, but they still contact me. I still have that relationship. And I feel like, and a lot of times you actually, as we would call it in education, loop with your kids.
Right.
So you move with the kids that you work with. Yep. And so like I would teach kids from freshman year to senior year.
Oh, wow.
Currently,
that's amazing.
Yeah. So currently I'm in a director's role, but I also teach too. So my, the kids that I started off as the only teacher in that building, and now we have more because our population grew, because we were a brand new school. But I have 5th graders right now that I've had since 3rd grade. I know them really well. I know everything about their skill sets. I know everything about their families, about their homes, and that community you build. It's really gratifying to be in that community. with the children. And so that's kind of why I got into it. And then there's, things that I've done as an extension of that, working with Adam and reimagining migration and being part of the fellowship program this last year, and even building my program for our program further to where our students are becoming leaders in our school, and they're an asset. We look at their language as an asset to the school. So and I'll get into that later about the whole project I did with Adam and with the organization for our students. But I would say that it's a whole exciting world to be in.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Adam,
how about you?
It's funny. I'm in a weird role, right? So I'm not in the classroom. I miss kids and I love them. It's like what makes me happy that I can start. I have a funny journey into education. My mother founded an educational nonprofit. My mother founded a group called Facing History and Ourselves. And I did that.
Your mother founded that organization?
My mother did.
Wow.
My mother, can I say badass? My mother's a badass.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry, as a history teacher, we use that resource so much.
My mother's a total badass.
Love it.
And so I try to deny.
Oh, hail Mama Strom.
You're a kid, right? And you're like, oh God, I don't want to do what my mother does. Right. So I worked in Hollywood because I wanted to go make movies because I thought film was going to do education.
Awesome.
Okay.
It was awful. I could not stand it. I could be lots of stories. That's another conversation. So I quit. And when I quit, I told people I was in this talent agency, I'm going to go teach. And they said, why would you want to go do that? So why would you have such a good job here in Hollywood? Why would you want to go be with kids? The only job that I could find teaching is I was teaching severely emotionally disturbed kids.
Oh, wow.
And they were all immigrant kids, except for one or two. And these were kids who didn't fit in the dominant culture of the school community, right? They'd been thrown out. And nobody cared what I did because nobody cared about the kids. And the kids were wonderful. Unfortunately, they were terribly off track in education by the time I got them. But you just thought, why does nobody love these kids? And, they needed to be loved. I mean this. They needed to be seriously loved and challenged and engaged. And so that was it. I left LA and I started working at the Tenement Museum in New York, which is a museum telling the story of immigrant life. And I've thought for years, these are the kids who I admire, right? Immigrant kids end up playing an amazing role as cultural translators in their families' lives.
Right.
They're the folks engaging, helping parents. They're balancing cultures. And these are the most interesting young people you could be involved with in your entire life.
Right.
And then on a personal note, my family is very in touch with this immigration story. It was 100 years ago. But if you ask us how we define ourselves, we never felt we were in. And we never felt we were in. And that immigrant story was a way to kind of keep us.
Why did your family never feel they were in? Just looking at the positionality as a white male, what is it that your family felt like they were not in, quote unquote?
So Chicago wasn't a great place for my dad. So two stories. One is my mother grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. My mother grew up in Memphis, Tennessee in a time of segregation. She was an absolutely privileged white young woman. But her family was very, very, very outspoken on civil rights and social justice issues. Her brother worked at the first Civil Rights Division in the Justice Department. And you should have seen the hate that they received. But, by choice, not just by birth. They were Jews, not popular as Jews. But the second the Jew starts working for the Civil Rights Division, that's really a bad idea.
Right.
Except for it was a great idea, right? And then my father grew up in Chicago on the South Side when there was a Polish-Jewish split. My dad's first day of elementary school, they asked him what church he went to. He said, "Well, we don't go to church, we go to a synagogue." And the kid spit in his face. And my dad punched the kid back, and my dad got suspended. That was welcome to elementary school. And I have stories like that too in my own elementary school. With people, they just don't believe. They're like, "How did that possible? That couldn't have happened to you." I'm like, well, guess what? People will find the other wherever a community is. They're good at finding the other.
Right.
For whatever reason, we were that. It's useful. I mean, I hate to say it. I hate what I went through as a kid. It's really useful. Because I can be in different rooms than I would have ever been able to be in as just a white guy. Because I think I know little bits of people's stories, right? Because I've experienced little bits of some of that outsiderness. Not the same.
But enough for you to relate to your students.
Yeah.
For you to have that compassion that's needed.
They thought it was hysterical that this they couldn't they didn't understand why I cared about them. Right. What's wrong with you?
Well, I think that leads us to a good segue to the next questions. What is the biggest stereotype or stereotypes about my multilingual learners? Now, you gave us your story. The stereotype now in America is they're either from some, war-torn Arab country in the Middle East, including Afghanistan, which isn't part of the, Arab Middle East technically, or they're coming, they're crossing our borders from Central and South America. So what are the biggest stereotypes that you find for multilingual learners?
They can't do it. I would say they can't do it. Like, they get excluded a lot from like gifted programs and advanced learning programs where like the word they use is low. They're low. Where really, it's not a disability to be bilingual. It's not a disability to be multilingual. So you can't group, when you think of it from a service standpoint, you can't group, our supports and our services as a multilingual team with the special education supports because they're different. And they're different programs and they have different functions. And so like in our program, we try to lead kids towards scaffold the curriculum in language, but we still give them that challenge, right? We scaffold, but we never change the literature we use from the general education program. We never change the higher order thinking. We just scaffold the language. And it's really just building that bridge to bilingualism and biliteracy. And so that's
powerful.
There's a lot of exclusion of multilingual learners from gifted programs, or they'll say, well, they got into gifted, they don't need multilingual services. Okay, they got into gifted, but they still may need those services for, that language support still. Right. And so and sometimes there is that otherness that Adam talks about to where they're almost on their own island from the school community. So, and that the stereotype is they can't be leaders in the school community, but, we believe they can be leaders in their own learning and to where they can drive the school community.
I mean, to build on that, right? So there was a survey done last year with principals around the country. 60% of principals report anti-immigrant incidents in their school on a monthly basis.
On a monthly basis.
On a monthly, actually bi-weekly, if I remember the way that they phrased the question right. So the 80% of the teachers in that same survey are watching how attitudes towards immigrant kids are impacting the way that kids are succeeding, right? Academically, in their social and emotional lives. And it's important to remember that everything that what Sarah just said is actually part of what's happening in a larger society. So all the stereotypes that we have about immigrants, our kids are sucking that stuff in. They're breathing it. Beverly Daniel Tatum, who writes about race, often talks about the smog of racism that we breathe in. These kids are breathing in that smog. They know that the president of the United States has said things that make them vulnerable. They know when local leaders say that. They know when a newspaper has said that they're not wanted. They're afraid of immigration and enforcement. So all the stereotypes that we can have, and we can go by group, right? They know what they are and they breathe them in. My colleagues did a study of immigrant origin kids a few years ago, and they said most Americans think that people of my group are X. The number one word that they came up with was bad. So these kids are breathing it. They believe it.
Yeah, they
are. So how about, I guess, let's talk about some assets some more. And Adam, you started talking about this earlier about how, a multilingual student is that cultural bridge between, like you said, the family and you as the educator, and I just remember like when I was in the classroom visiting the ESOL classroom, and it felt different, just culturally, it felt different. Can you all talk a little bit more about the assets? We talk about like these stereotypes that, and Sarah said is, being multilingual is not a disability. Can you all talk more about some of the assets that you see with your students?
Doug, I'm actually going to answer that by talking about the fellowship project I did with Adam this year, because it'll lead into that. So I work with mostly currently like a K-4, K-5 population. And so we actually did a project in our building with a children's book called The Name Jar, where the kids learn that every child has a name and every name has a story. And so what we did with our students was we had them all research their names and learn about their name. And a lot of students had stories about their immigrant story. So, I mean, when we're thinking about the assets that our students bring, they bring that different story, that culture, that originalness. And everybody has their own qualities, but, they bring that to the school, and it really creates a fabric to the school where everybody really learns about each other and connects with each other. So, I mean, with assets, you have language, you have culture, and the culture of the home. And, when they're educating their peers who are, may not be multilingual learners or may not be immigrants, they educate the whole school about their culture when they talk about themselves. And so we try to do that weekly with something we call Culture Crew, where we have a school-wide meeting and students, depending on the time of the year. So like during Ramadan, which we did this virtually, a student talked about how his family, how they celebrate Ramadan and how they observe it. And so the other students learn from them, and it creates a school culture that is accepting, that is inclusive, and it teaches all students later on to be inclusive in their workplace and to have that global education.
Love it.
So I want to build on that, right? So if you're multilingual, right, you're just even starting there. I get so jealous. I get so jealous. I speak little bits of lots of languages, but little bits. So what an amazing skill we don't recognize and honor, to be able to communicate in multi, languages. We need to normalize that. We need to bring that in. One of my favorite lessons I've been teaching this year is this wonderful song called "Somos Más Americanos" by a band called Los Tigres del Norte. They're a Mexican American band, and it's about how the border didn't cross the border. The border crossed them. And the song's in Spanish, and so I love teaching it because, like, I'll just say, so all right, so I just want us to listen to the song, and I'll be doing another assignment. And then people will say, I don't understand. I'm like, well, maybe you should go find somebody who speaks Spanish and go out and help you. Right? So, we need to model that as an asset, because it really is. But then beyond that, think about the communication skills that you have when you're able to speak in two cultures. Right?
The code switching as well.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. That's not a detriment. That's unbelievable.
Right.
Like I'm so jealous, right? Again, and we play, right? But these kids, that's their lives,
right?
And it builds in a cognitive flexibility that builds in perspective-taking skills, because they're having to practice it. How might my mom and dad be thinking about this? How might my cousin be thinking about this? Because that might be read differently for them because their stories. So, I mean, we could go on and on, but this isn't just fluff. This is actually core cognitive skills that we're trying to teach.
Right.
But I wanted you all to speak on it because earlier, Adam, I think you talked about the othering, right? And it's just, I guess, just this the ugliness, the ignorance of the bigotry to say, like you said, for someone to just speak English, just speak one language, and to act like that puts you on some pedestal when you have folks bringing in language and culture, but you've otherized them, so much. And then, like you said, now you've got the whole school community looking at them like the other, and then all these beautiful assets you all talked about. don't get realized. So you all just took me to a place where I wanted to be just now. So it's good. It's good.
We're gonna check the comments. Go ahead, Sara.
There's one thing I didn't mention that I think I should have. And, Adam, we talked about this a lot in Reimagining Migration, the resilience. There is a resilience that our multilingual students, whether they are new immigrants, whether they are first generation, second generation, in my case, I'm third generation on my dad's side. There's a resilience that they bring into the school community because of that, that connection to somebody who's come from another country and has worked hard and succeeded, and they've learned that culture. So I think like the resilience they bring is key to your school community.
That's
the resilience of learning more than one language.
Right. And it's very difficult. I mean, just not only the code switching, but I think America is one of the few countries that doesn't have such an appreciation for multilingual, that capability. Like you go to Europe or you go to the Middle East or anywhere in the country, there's more than one language for street signs or for communicating. So I find that fascinating. We do have a question from our audience before Doug asks our next question. So from Sara, what has been most surprising in your journeys?
I think every day our students surprise me with their insightfulness, their ability to observe things, especially when they're little kids, the ability to observe things around them and understand them in a way you didn't think they would, because we're adults and they're children. And I think so, and the ability to understand that we are all different, like I said, with our Name Jar project, which turns into our identity affirmation festival called Pieces of Me. They all learn that we're different. And it was a third grader that said this to our whole audience once, that there are pieces of us, and there are pieces of us that we choose, and there are pieces of us that, are given to us. And for the ability for a third grader to be able to conceptualize that and understand that is huge.
Yep.
Well, that gave me getting in my feelings space right now with that one.
Something I can never forget in my career.
Wow.
It's funny. I love where you're going with it. I have in some ways, maybe I have to start with the intellectual. I am so heartbroken in the way that our myths about each other and our own stories get in the way of understanding other people. And it hurts all the time. We don't know our own stories, so we make this stuff up. We make up these. Immigrant stories are superhero stories, but it doesn't mean that they aren't hard, and there weren't struggles, and there weren't challenges. So all the things that we ascribe to ourselves and our families, these superhuman capabilities, and we have an inability often to recognize it in other people. So that's the negative. And then the positive is, it's amazing how quick you can help people to start to see how amazing other people's stories are. So we did this one simple project we called Moving Stories, and we have kids interview each other about their own stories and their own family's migration backgrounds. Again, whether they're stories by choice or not, and just sit down and people talk to each other let somebody talk for 7 minutes about their story, and somebody else talk for 7 minutes, and at the end of it, they come back and they're like, "Oh my God, we have so much in common! I know these people like I've never," and you're like. You want to feel good. I want to say, "Oh, look, I've created this opportunity," but it's actually horrible because we've never taken the time to listen to each other.
Right. Wow.
And that's surprising.
Right. Something that basic. Right. Just listening to each other. Right. Wow. So you all have, you both, well, I know, Sara, you said you've been doing this about 16 years, and Adam, I guess you have some years under your belt. Doing some of this, right?
So showing you is
so talk to us about what kind of changes have you seen when it comes to teaching multilingual students over time? What kind of changes have you seen?
I'm going to talk from a technical standpoint in terms of services and how we support students in our programs. And I will say this, that there is a push for inclusiveness. There's a push for co-top models. There is a push for really, pushing our multilingual students to be, part of the general education curriculum and to be, really achieving within that general education curriculum. However, there are places that still do what I call your 1980s services. Here's the thing. We don't listen to cassette tapes anymore, right? We don't use a Walkman. We don't listen to cassette tapes anymore. So why is the structure then still the structure that we used in 1975 and 1980s with multilingual learners, where we pulled them out of the classroom and we gave them another curriculum that didn't even connect to what they're learning in the classroom? I think we still have some progress we need to achieve. However, there has been more of an inclusion of native language. There has been more of an inclusion within the general education curriculum. The idea of translanguaging and the research of Ofelia Garcia has come out, and the research of Jana Echevarria has come out with the SIOP model. And, we're practicing that in our general education classrooms. And, there's, we're becoming less on those islands. But at the same time, there's a lot of places that are still on that island and need to get off. Toss the cassette tapes, get your Spotify on, and let's bring our services and our supports and, our teaching into 2020 for our multilingual learners.
That's a great metaphor about the island, because I think a lot of their students, unfortunately, feel like they're stuck on this island and they're deserted. And there aren't, like you said, those, and they're, although they may not be speaking or being able to communicate in the same language, they can see the discrepancies from what their counterpart friends have and what they have. So it's very damaging, I think, also to the psyche.
And I think I also want to add something that, the typical stereotype was that our multilingual learners were newcomers and they were new immigrants. And, our multilingual learners, I think we only have one student who was born outside of the U.S. A lot of our students were born within the U.S. and actually they speak the language at home and their families embrace the language at home, which, we want them to continue to do. And so they speak a certain language at home, and, that language is brought into the classroom a lot of the times. And, we have to understand that some of our students are going to be first, second, even third generation Americans, and that's okay.
And to add to some of what Sarah was saying, I think I'll add a historical perspective because I feel like that's my job. So, in 1924, there's a lawsuit in Nebraska because German immigrants, how dare they, were teaching their students in German. And the state of Nebraska is like, can't have that happen. And it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And they win the right to teach a native language. Despite that 1924 legal case, we've been fighting that battle. When you say so, like ever since.
Wow.
Do we value that language or not? I mean, it wasn't that long ago. I live in Massachusetts. It wasn't that long ago that we outlawed the teaching of bilingual approaches to working with, English language learners, right? It's only the last couple of years that bilingual programs have been, and bilingual approaches have been brought back. And Massachusetts is not the only state, right? I mean, I
think it's New Mexico or Arizona who also has that law, which
Arizona.
Arizona.
It's English only, I think.
Yes.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think it is.
Yep.
And it wasn't like English only, but it was like, but just don't do bilingual, right? But of course, and so now there were clever ways to phrase it. And you should explain what translanguaging means at some point, because now we've found ways around it as good teachers, because good teachers are good at that. Good teachers are really good at shutting doors and figuring out how to make what needs to happen. But I think that there's also there's a complicated cultural shifts, So one is the literature. I mean, I actually in some ways want to thinking about the multilingual learners themselves. Let Sarah talk about the particularity. What I think I'll argue for a radical shift that needs to happen, which is that kids in dominant cultures need to learn about and value immigrant stories in immigrant lives. We're in this moment right now. There's a great piece going around the education, social justice, social media about how white kids need to actually take up the cut and learn about social justice issues, and it can't just be Black kids' responsibility. This is true about immigration as well.
Adam,
Yeah.
I want to add something to that. It's not just about the kids learning the stories. It's
Yeah.
about the educators.
Absolutely.
It's about the educators. And I think that's where you need to start first. Everybody is taking an anti-racist stance now, and that's great. Well, a lot of people are. I shouldn't say everyone. A lot of people are, and that's great. But by taking that anti-racist stance, we got to learn. We have to learn about each other and each other's cultures and how they shape our schools and shape our communities before even our students learn that. We have to self-reflect. We have to self-reflect on, and think about our own implicit biases and how they influence our, day-to-day interactions in the classroom and our day-to-day instruction. And then, Adam, we need to take that to the kids, right? So we have to infuse it in ourselves first, I think.
So amen, right? You're totally. I mean, I think that's where all good professional education works. And you don't just hand teachers this stuff it's about living your life and thinking differently about this. But we need to change. But so what we ultimately need to do is change the curriculum. We really need to learn our history. We need to be able to read the literature of the literatures of the United States. There was a fabulous exhibit at the Institute of Contemporary Art here in Boston. And every book, they had an installation, and every book in this library installation at the end of the show was written by a first-generation immigrant or a migrant, because they're all included stories of the Great Migration. That's the classic literature of this country. That's the great stories that we have. But we sort of have kind of ignored it and don't value that. Yeah, right. It's not, I'm reading Sahar's.
Sahar's comments are, first of all, V is like, yes, aren't not a
yes.
So Sahar, look, it's what we should all be reading.
But I think, Adam, your website has great resources that teachers can utilize. So that leads us to my question is, why should there be a need to teach about migration, and why does it matter? I mean, before you answer the question, there's an interesting historical piece when you spoke about Germans in Nebraska, and we were talking about Ben Franklin earlier because of Boston. His biggest worry was the Germans were going to come and take over, and everybody in America was going to speak German from there. So that's interesting where, again, going back with the stereotypes, people think they come from certain regions, but back then, old Ben Franklin was so worried about the Germans. And now when we think about Germans, we're like Western European white, why would there be such a scare? So why is there a need to teach about migration? Why does it matter? And it shouldn't just live. I'm a social studies person. People always think it's just social studies. Speak about how this is cross content.
So before I go, what about you, Sarah? What do you think before I get on?
There's a lot of avenues we can talk about. First, I'll say teaching about migration is important because we all have a migration story, right? We all have a story of how we got here. We may not all know it, right? We may not all know our exact story, but we all know a way that we got here. And so why wouldn't we teach that?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we? And I don't understand why it's not in curriculum.
Right, it's like a no-brainer.
Or why it's sugar-coated. Why it's sugar-coated in curriculum. As you talked about earlier, Doug. Why can't we all be able to talk about how everybody really got here? Right. But also, I feel like there's a part of that is part of cultural responsiveness in our education. And some people see it as a checkbox. No. It has to be infused in all content areas.
Yes.
Because, and with that, it's the migration story and also the idea of igniting intellectual curiosity in our children, of all children. Yes. So with that, it's kind of like this. You could teach the migration story, but also there's that critical learning that needs to happen as well within that discussion and talking about that migration story. So why it's not there. Or it's partially there. I would say it's partially there. I don't know, but it needs to be there.
So to build on that, right? So Sarah says that we all have a migration story. Literally, the story of who we are and how we got where we are is a story of migration. I'm talking to you on a computer. This computer does not exist without immigration and migration. It just doesn't, right? Boston, Massachusetts does not exist without migration.
Nope.
Right? So, I mean, from a perspective, people have been on the move since we were first stood up. You know, I know how people have different stories of creation, but actually our shared cultural stories are always stories about movement and migration. You know, we're across religious traditions, right? I mean, you know, these are shared stories, and yet we sort of have lost it. So it's interesting. So that's one piece. The other is a simple demographic story. If 26% of the kids in our schools, kids under 18 years old, are immigrant origin, we need to figure out how we're all going to live and understand and work together and value each other, right? I'm not a big, you know, utilitarian around education, but from a utilitarian perspective, we better figure out how to get along, right? And I think part of doing that is by understanding what is our shared experience. Then I've nodded that this is our shared history. Outside of American Indians, everybody in North America came here as a migrant, not as an immigrant. I'm very careful. We are not a nation of immigrants. We are a nation of migrants. And even American Indian populations were forced to migrate, actually in response to settler migrations in this country. So to actually understand our history better, we actually need to understand migration. From a genetic standpoint, while race is not a useful scientific concept, we do know that if we were to trace our DNA, that our migration stories are literally written into our DNA. So I tell you, I don't know if I told you last summer that my father was a geneticist, and he did his research, and he was very excited because it turns out the Wasserstroms, these Eastern European Jews, had spent all this time in the Punjab, and we have no idea.
Interesting.
We have no idea how that happened. It didn't.
Punjab is a province in northern India.
Yeah, exactly. So somewhere along the way, before they got to Eastern Europe, they had been in the Punjab, but it was way, way back. But what we can say is through our genetics, we're tracing the stories of human migration. We're understanding cultural mixing that we've never got before. Then I will say that the world is in trouble. We were going to talk about the climate. The world is in trouble. The climate is changing. As our climate changes, more and more people are going to be forced to leave their homes, forcibly displaced. We in the United States are some of the largest polluters in the world. We emit more CO2 in the air than just about anybody. That means when people are forced to leave their homes because of the changes that are coming through climate, strikes me as we need to understand that and think about our own civic and ethical responsibilities related to that. And then I will also say all the civic stuff that we're fighting about all the time around citizenship, around DACA, around, who should be getting what rights. So many of these issues tie back to questions of migration. But if we don't know any of these stories, we're totally incompetent in trying to solve our shared problems.
Well, I think the stories that you're talking about, and if we're talking not just climate change, but say of DACA, let's focus just on, say, Central America right now. I always tell people don't up and say, wake up one morning, like, let's just leave our house and go. Going back to Sada's question as why it's not being taught or why it's not there, we know the reason. There's a lot of foreign policy issues that have led to the fleeing of people from their countries that are now coming back to haunt certain countries. And when I look at, say, what the influx of immigrants just in Europe, for example, well, what did you guys do in the Middle East and, say, Africa? It's not, the sense of karma just doesn't get with me like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. Well, the issue of foreign policy is one of the major issues. And, one of those famous lines that people are saying, if you don't want the refugee issue, don't cause it, which is another reason.
I loved when people were talking about the French soccer team last year. There was this
fight,
yes. Right? Were they French or were they immigrants?
Right? Well, when they didn't score, they were immigrants, but when they won, they were French.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Trevor Noah did a wonderful reminder that, he said, these folks who are, many of them from different parts of Africa, he said, they don't speak French by accident.
Right. Absolutely.
They spoke French because the French were there.
Right.
Right? Why did they want to leave when there was trouble at home? They wanted to leave because there was French meddling in the country, but also that was the language that they spoke. It was an opportunity, right? So Central America, we know that there's a messy, messy history of the U.S., both in Latin America and more recently in Central America.
Correct.
Yeah, not surprised. And then we need to think about what are our ethical responsibilities there. And, regardless of what you think about American foreign policy in the recent wars in the Middle East, what is amazing to me is that some of the recent decisions to limit migration and immigrants has made it impossible for some of the folks who served as translators for the United States military. They've not been able to get into this country. These are basic, moral, fundamental questions that we need to understand. If you were somewhere else, you start to change your relationship. So why do people leave? We know this, right? People leave for jobs. They leave for love. They leave for connection. More immigrants come to this country actually just because of family reunification than anything else.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right. The number of refugees we take in at this moment is
very minuscule.
It's minuscule.
But even the process is ridiculous. It's not as simple as people think it is.
Right.
Just to enter the country, regardless. I mean, it's the process is very, very obscure. So on that note, I mean, did you want to say something, Sara? Final note.
Final note. I want to appreciate you all for being on here, Adam. It's always a good time, and I think as educators, we need to expand ourselves. We need to really think deeply, look inward, and understand our own sense of self, and then really try to look at our students and our school community and try to understand it better in order for us to have that cultural responsiveness and have, that community of learning with each other and from each other.
I love it. I love it.
Sara's always eloquent. So it's like
I try.
Follow that up. But I think that Sara's right. We just got to start with ourselves. One of the things that I think is really hard is so a lot of the best educators I know feel very isolated. We have to find ways to continue to break down the isolation. So over COVID, one of the things that's been really interesting to me is I've been leading workshops and webinars and some of this conversation. You find you bring community together in ways that people didn't expect. And through bringing community together, there's opportunities for conversation. And they're really remarkable. It's like that simple gesture of interviewing each other. It's a chance to be in a relationship and get your ideas tested and sometimes be totally wrong. Can we open ourselves up to be vulnerable enough to be wrong?
Right.
So I'm totally honored, Abir and Doug, that you would have me here, and Sara for suggesting the conversation. What you're doing
I'm
is
honored to be here too.
Thank you.
Good. Well, we appreciate having you all. Yes.
Thank you.
So in the comments, thank you for those that joined us in the comments. Sahar says, young people are ripe for developing empathy. I think that's beautiful. I'm big on empathy and just the wording there, ripe for developing, beautiful. So very nice.
He's a writer.
Yes, I know, must be, right? Yep. And then Robin, another educator, talking about the insights you all provided for decisions that she has to make in her job. So we told Adam we have a routine that we do here. We love hip hop, right? So here on Real Talk, and we had we started with Tupac. Ain't nobody alive can take my mama's place.
Nope.
Ode to Abir's mom. So we call it 4x4. So it's the 4 pillars of hip hop. And what we ask our guests is, if you can you name it, your choice? Can you name one person from each of the pillars? So we've got emceeing, DJing, breaking or b-boying, b-girling, and also aerosol art or graffiti art. So if you want to go all out,
let's start at the end because
I
just saw the fabulous interview with Fab5 Freddy talking about graffiti art, right?
Love it.
I'm old. I saw Run DMC's first show in Boston. I am really old.
Wow.
I was like, "Hi, look, it's a white guy at the corner. That's me." But so
I'm surprised you didn't throw out the Beastie Boys.
Right.
My students called it Mad Loke, so that's also how old I am.
Okay, so Adam, hold on. So Adam came out swinging. So he's got a graffiti artist in Fab Five Freddy, and one of my favorite rap groups of all time, Run DMC. I mean, we could make a whole show on them. So, Sada, what you got? You got
Adam, I'm not as cool as you.
You got a DJ or a breaker, a b-boy, b-girl, a DJ.
So you're talking from like back in the day?
Back in the day.
You're talking to a millennial. I don't know.
So I'll give you a hint. Take. I don't want to put you on the spot. Just take Adam's DJ from his MC duo. Can you do that? So.
I don't think she knows who they are.
Like Run who? Okay.
I know who Run DMC is, but
okay, good.
So who was their DJ, Sarah? See, I want to put you on the spot. We don't do that.
I don't know.
It's all love. So Adam,
that's why I'm not even gonna act like I do, because I don't.
I'm so old. So
Adam, you win that one.
Jay Dilla.
Oh my God, Adam is crushing it. Okay, Jay, we love Jay Dilla. Rest in peace. Rest in power. Oh my goodness, some of the dirtiest beats around. Okay. Adam, you on a roll. Okay, Adam, you can't get out of here till you give us you got to give us a breaker. B-boy, B-girl.
I don't think I can do because I can't even think.
Sarah's like, yes.
You know how it feels.
I mean, like you got me. See, I don't think I even know that category. Like I'm thinking like old school like Fly Girls is what I'm thinking about.
Fly Girls are good. So you remember
Perez doing like
oh yeah,
Living Color.
Right. So Adam, you said used to work in Hollywood. Remember like break? They don't even call it break dancing. We don't use that term.
I know.
Remember it got commercialized and it just kept on making all these movies. Okay. All right.
Oh yeah, no, I sadly yes, I saw Wild Style in the theater when it came out.
Okay. Oh my goodness, Adam's crushing. Wild. Okay.
Love it.
I'm not even gonna try.
All right. I think 75% of the challenge is met. That's a passing grade.
Nice. That is a passing grade. Wonderful.
Well done.
Well, it's a good thing you don't have Sada on your, lifeline to ask her any of those questions. You'd probably lose. Sorry, Sada. I love you.
Right. Okay. Sada, because she can drop some more. You want any more acronyms before we go, Sada?
There you go.
I can drop those acronyms.
Give us one last parting acronym, Sada.
CASTLE.
Oh, what's CASTLE?
Those are social emotional learning standards.
That is
true.
That is true.
Yep.
If my friend Amalio's watching, I'm sorry. So thank you both for being on the show. If you want to be in touch, also on my website for Altair Consulting, for every episode, we have the video. We also have more information. This will be one of them, the website where you can contact Adam. He does have not a retreat. What are we calling it?
It's a virtual online seminar.
Which is in 2 weeks. Yeah. And I'm excited to be a part of that too.
I'm excited to be there too.
Yes. And thank you to Sada, who is the one who's always giving us these nuggets. Like she's dropping gems all the we So
just don't drop beats.
That was good. That worked.
I like it.
Good.
Yeah.
So
good stuff.
We appreciate both of you for being on the show. So take care and have a good night.
Thank you.
Had a good time. Take care. Have a good night.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye now.
That was great.
That was fun. Fun. And so it was rich, right? So we learned a lot. We had a good time.
Yes.
Before
we close out, though, Doug, can you tell us what we're having next week? There is a podcast episode on Code Switch, one of my favorite podcasts ever. And I'll add the link as well, that talks about DACA and undocumented immigrants as well, and their stories and how they're forgotten, which is very deep because it's hard living in quote unquote, some people live in fear,
right,
and not knowing what's going to happen. So that's also going to be on the website with the link, because Code Switch is, I think, one of the best podcasts
absolutely
ever.
And it just hit number one. I saw on Apple Podcast. I would listen another day, but I just listen I don't listen linearly. Is that a word? I just whatever topic hits me on Code Switch, I grab it. Love it.
I agree.
So if I can, one more shout out before we close out. Just want to shout out my man Joe. So if you remember, Julia last week, I think, was the week before, told me about the hip hop stamps.
Yep.
U.S. Post Office put them out today. My man Joe actually bought me a sheet of stamps.
Oh, that's
so
nice.
I'm gonna shout out Joe. Joe, good looking out, man. Very nice.
Joe.
My man Joe. He knows how I feel about my 4 pillars. So
yes, we do.
Appreciate you, Joe. So next week we'll be back, and we're gonna have Dominic Smith. He'll have a former student of his with him. They'll be speaking about teaching Latinx students and an Irish man in America. So got a lot in that episode. Just let that marinate for about a week. Come back and join us next week. We'll be here to do it again. So,
and please subscribe to our YouTube channel at just look up LTR Real Talk. Right now we're down like 19 subscribers, but we need to get there. We hope
need
we
to hit
will
20.
get there.
Nice round number.
Yeah, or 1,000. That would be even better. You know, 1,000 would be good. So tune in next week. We will have more information. Again, check out the website for more information about everything that's from this episode. And hopefully we will see you next week.
Hopefully.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Take care. Bye.
Bye.